Some dudes just have some extra gear, some extra power.
Before Alex Pereira ever stepped into the UFC, there was already something different about him.
When they were saying he was coming over to the UFC, I told DC, I go, dude, get ready for this. Because this puts people into orbit.
He wasn't a long-time MMA prodigy. He wasn't climbing amateur ladders for years, and he wasn't chasing attention. He was a kickboxer. And in kickboxing, he wasn't just good, he was dangerous.
Alex Pereira is one of the greatest kickboxers of all time. That's the boogeyman of boogeymen.
Every fight looked the same. One shot, and it was over. While his glory kickboxing career seemingly came to an end in 2019, one call-out from his former rival would change his life and the mixed martial arts world forever.
At the end of the day, no one knows who the he is, and he's gonna be that guy when I'm world champion, when I'm a legend. He's gonna be at some pub, talking some shit about, I beat that guy one time.
Long before the UFC, Pereira built his name in kickboxing. And that's where everything started with his biggest rival then, Israel Adesanya. At the time, Adesanya was rising fast, flashy, technical, confident. But Pereira had something else, pressure. Adesanya was ahead, until he wasn't. And that moment never left their story.
But then, this fight I fought and I got knocked out. My first and only ever knockout loss, and then my only back-to-back loss as well. So for me, it was a lot of learning.
Pereira would make his MMA debut in the Brazil regional scene against Quemuelo Tony, an undefeated regional prospect at the time. And after some big moments for Poatan, he would find himself on his back and would tap to a rear naked choke. His first outing in MMA ended in defeat. Otoni would go on to continue competing, trading some wins and some losses on the regional scene, with a handful of canceled fights. Alex Pereira's run in MMA was far from over. Just 3 months later, he was back in the cage against regional prospect Marcelo Cruz. This time, however, something has changed. Poatan immediately looked more measured, more calculated. Rather than swinging hard early, Alex took his time, looking for the finish, and that, sure enough, he found it. Cruz actually continued competing, even winning a handful of his fights before formally retiring from professional MMA in 2023, after a win against Miguel Firmino. Pereira now went on to face his toughest opponent, yet 6-0 undefeated regional prospect Marcus Vinicius. But that didn't matter for Pereira. Immediately as the fight began, Poatan showed improved takedown defense and completely dominated Marcus before earning a brutal finish. After Alex, Marcus would go on a small win streak before eventually going on a skid and retiring in 2024 following another brutal KO. And that was the end of Alex's MMA career for now. Poatan would go on an impressive 9-fight win streak and take on the best of the best in glory kickboxing, even knocking out future rival Israel Adesanya along the way. At LFA 95, Alex Pereira would go on to face Thomas Powell, and he was back with an absolute bang. There was no denying it anymore, and the UFC already had its eyes on him. Powell would end his career going 5-5, getting brutally TKO'd once again by Alec Lawrence in 2024. Pereira would return to glory for 2 more fights against Artem Vakitov, and after winning 1 fight against him and losing the other, it was time for him to make history in the UFC. After years of whispers, rumors, and hype, the only man to take out current reigning UFC middleweight champion at the time, Israel Adesanya, was finally getting his chance at the big stage.
There's a guy that's in MMA now. That's the last guy to knock him out. His name's Alex Pereira, and he's truly one of the most terrifying human beings alive. Oh, dude.
Pereira would be welcomed to the promotion by veteran Andreas Michalidis, and while many people in the combat sports world had their eye on Alex, his opponent knew what he was stepping into, but warned it was a different world in the UFC.
He's a good fighter, but that's MMA, that's not kickboxing, so he has to be aware of many things.
When fight night came, Alex Pereira's debut told the world everything it needed to know. He wasn't here to adjust, he was here to finish fights. The middleweight division was on notice. Michalidis would go on to compete 1 more time in the UFC, before moving on to the regional scene, where he would go on a 3-fight win streak, and then a skid, last competing in 2025. Just a few months later, Alex was matched up against fellow contender Bruno Silva, a man who hadn't been beaten in over 4 years. Silva went into the fight looking to add another knockout to his record and challenge for the belt.
There's no way to make history if you are not brave enough. So you guys are not gonna see me fighting like Khabib or Demian Maia. If I have to, I will, but I'm gonna look for another knockout.
But that would never happen. After 15 hard-fought minutes and battling through some initial adversity, he earned an unanimous decision. Silva would continue competing in the UFC, but has since gone on a 5-fight losing streak. But maintains his battle with Alex Pereira as one of his toughest in his career and wears that fight proudly.
A lot of people thought that I was going to go into that octagon to survive Poatan, and that's not what happened. I actually walked in there to actually knock him out. A lot of people come to me and say, hey, you really stood toe to toe. Still, I love when people come up and say something like that, especially him. He talks of the fight in all the respect in the world for everything they did.
Alex Pereira would now go on to face one of the UFC's most controversial figures, Sean Strickland. And it would also be on a card with his former rival, Israel Adesanya. This was his ticket into a title shot. Strickland was quick to call out Alex's style and believed he could be the one to crack the Poatan code.
He's a tough dude, you know. I've trained with plenty of good kickboxers. I think I can handle it, you know. And after meeting him at a war and I, beat Alex, you're gonna see I'm a whole different guy.
But when fight night came, so did another highlight reel knockout. Following the fight, Strickland and Pereira actually struck up a friendship. But when asked about their fight, he spared no words.
Here's the thing, you guys, about Alex. I could spar Alex, and I could go point for point, and I could hit him, I could kick him. But the difference is, the man touches you, and you just die.
Sean would eventually become the champion, lose 2 hard-fought fights to Dricus du Plessis, and bounce back with a big win against Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. The time had come for 2 former rivals to finally settle it. Adesanya had never been defeated at middleweight at the time, and he knew that Pereira was looking to stop that, but felt he just wasn't on his same level.
Let him enjoy his time right now. Let him enjoy his 15 minutes.
For Alex, this was his time to cement his legacy and take out the only man he believed was his toughest test. At UFC 281, the stylebender would meet Poatan. It was a rematch more than half a decade in the making. At the end of the very first round, Izzy would clip Alex and nearly end the fight, but he was saved by the bell and would weather the storm. Alex was getting dominated for all but 24 minutes, and near the end of their final round, Alex Pereira would change his life and the course of MMA forever, becoming the UFC middleweight champion of the world and snapping Adesanya's win streak for good. Adesanya believed one singular mistake cost him their fight, but admitted Pereira knew what he needed to do and how he needed to do it like no other.
But again, he's just violent. Like when he smells blood, he just goes in.
Yeah.
Like I said, he beats you like you owe him money or something.
Yeah.
He's on you.
A few months later, Pereira and Adesanya were back to settle their feud. Izzy knew exactly what he needed to do to stop Pereira and get his belt back.
I just know, I've heard this guy. He knows. He might try and bullshit and or whatever. He's not. I don't have to try and intimidate him. He doesn't get intimidated. Neither do I.
When both men met again at UFC 287, things had changed. Alex had become a beloved villain in the world of MMA, and Izzy knew what he needed to do to reclaim his title. But the first round would begin and look a lot like their first fight, with Pereira quickly taking the lead. Then, in round 2, the unexpected happened. Out cold. Alex was KO'd for the first time in his mixed martial arts career. Adesanya would go on to fight Sean Strickland, drop his belt, and suffer devastating loss after loss. But when asked about Alex, he knew that their time shared together in the octagon would become known as one of the best rivalries in UFC history.
I just knew this is the last one. Like after this, I'm done with this guy, but I have to get him now. I have to get him now. And in that moment when I got it done, I got it done. It took me 6 years, and then I went after his kids too. I was like, yeah, where you at?
Alex Pereira was officially done with middleweight, accomplishing what he says he wanted to do. It was time for a new challenge. At UFC 291, Alex Pereira would go on to face former light heavyweight champion Jan Blachowicz. But questions remained on if his power and speed would transfer to a new weight class.
And that's it, I want to check my stand-up against him and try to knock him out. But if, something goes wrong in stand-up, I can use my wrestling and take him down.
At UFC 291, Alex and Jan would clash for 15 brutal minutes. Each traded big shots, battering each other, but Alex would ultimately win by split decision. Since then, Jan would go on a skid, fighting to a draw against Bogdan Guskov. Pereira found himself fighting a belt once again, this time at light heavyweight against a more than dangerous Jiří Procházka. Jiří was the former champion of the division and vacated due to injury after defeating Pereira's mentor Glover Teixeira, but now was fighting to earn back what he felt was his.
I'm watching his weak points, and there I will attack with the full power. That's why it's my style, a little bit risky, but it's a part of myself.
When the two met at UFC 295, Pereira faced some initial adversity. Procházka's unorthodox striking made Alex hesitant, and he began taking heavy shots towards the end of the first round. But just as confidence in Poatan was fading, he did what he does best. While Alex would make history now capturing gold in 2 divisions, Procházka was still hungry and knew he could climb his way to Pereira, even beating Alexander Rakic along the way. Headlining UFC 300, Alex Pereira was set to take on Jamal Hill. Hill was formerly champion of the division before vacating due to injury. But Hill was more than confident he could be the one to put Alex's lights out.
That's something I just know. I just trust myself. That's one of the biggest things that I hang my hat on, is the fact that I know that just naturally I show up. It's who I am. It's what I do.
But instead was on the receiving end of one of the most replayed knockouts and memes in UFC history. Since their fight, Hill has been on the receiving end of 2 more brutal losses from Jiří Procházka and Khalil Roundtree Jr., maintaining his respect for Alex, and even giving him his respect following their fight.
When somebody does a gritty competitor move, you can't be mad at that. I'm not mad at him for being a gritty competitor. Granted, it sucks being on the shitty end of it, but he did what he had to do. He pushed his brand further. He kept the belt where it's at and all those things.
Jiří had worked his way back to Poatan, but instead of the villain character that Alex was regarded in their first bout, Pereira had become a worldwide sensation both in and out of the cage. But the added hype did not make a difference for Jiří, and he was planning on fixing his mistakes and getting the belt back.
I saw that fight many times, and I will not change anything. And I wanna do the same right now, right this Saturday.
But like history repeating itself, Pereira would waste no time on Procházka, knocking him out cold.
In the fight, patient. Alex is the master of the patient, to wait for his moment, and so that was the big learn for me.
Jiří would bounce back with brutal finishes on Jamal Hill and Khalil Roundtree Jr., but would once again suffer another devastating defeat at UFC 327 when attempting to reclaim the belt against Carlos Ulberg. Alex had all but lapped the division and was looking for new contenders. In that search, he found Khalil Roundtree Jr.
It's a little bit difficult for me to say this, but I'm going to do this because I should. What makes me different is my overall ability compared to the guys that he's fought.
When UFC 307 came, it would become the toughest fight for Pereira in his entire MMA career. After a razor-thin 2 rounds, Alex had to do something big. At the end of the 3rd round, Poatan's power became too much for Roundtree, and at the end of the 4th round, it was over. Roundtree Jr. would go on to beat Jamal Hill and suffer a brutal loss to Jiří Procházka, but when looking back at his fight with Pereira, says he wouldn't have changed anything.
Every single round of that fight, I was thinking, how amazing is this? Every time I got punched, every exchange, I was in my mind thinking, like, how amazing is this?
Lurking around the light heavyweight division was a man looking to stop the Pereira hype train. His name was Magomed Ankalaev, a man who was lapping the division, with Poatan the only one left for him. And he knew he could beat the man who defeated so many others.
Right now we have a champion, we have a contender, we're fighting for an actual belt that's there, so we're gonna see who the real champion is.
Alex and Magomed would finally meet at UFC 313, and for the first time in his MMA career, Poatan was dominated. There were no flashy knockouts, big moments. Pereira was just on the receiving end of a beatdown. Ankalaev was now the champion at light heavyweight and was not shy to tell everyone that would listen that he was confident in his abilities and would welcome a rematch.
Who's supposed to be given the victory? You know, I've been pressuring him the entire time. He was running for 20 minutes, and then he's wondering who's supposed to get the victory. Listen, I'm happy for a rematch if he wants a rematch, but then maybe in the rematch he could fight for real, not just run away the entire time.
The champion was now the contender. Alex Pereira was a man on a mission and knew what he needed to do to get his belt back. At UFC 320, when the cage door closed, it took a little over 1 minute for Alex to drop Ankalaev and finish him in dominant fashion. Since that knockout, Ankalaev has not fought, but has welcomed a trilogy with Poatan. Alex Pereira's story feels like it's moving faster than everyone else's. He came in late, but he caught up immediately. And now he sits in a rare place in the sport. A fighter who didn't need years to prove himself, just moments. Now he is trying once again to make history and become the first ever triple champion in UFC history if he can successfully defeat Cyril Gane for the interim heavyweight belt at the White House. But the real question now is simple. How long can this last? Because the sport always catches up eventually. And when it does, we'll find out if Pereira's rise was just a moment or something permanent.